She hated him before she even knew his name. Not for what he said, but for the way he looked at her. Cold, calm, with an expression that made her feel like her existence was nothing more than an inconvenient detail in his perfectly structured day. The glass doors of North Shore Medical Center slid open, letting in a rush of icy February air and people who were always in a hurry. 8:30 a.m. The hour when the reception desk never had a moment of silence. "Good morning, how can I help you?" She repeated the phrase automatically, barely lifting her eyes. Emily Carter had been sitting behind the administrator's desk for almost 2 years. A deep navy uniform, strict, impersonal, perfectly pressed. A name badge, a quiet reminder that here she had a function, not a story. She knew how to smile without looking happy, and how to be polite in a way that discouraged questions. The line kept moving. The phone kept ringing. The printer jammed again. Just another ordinary morning. "Miss?" The voice came from too close. Low, confident, not irritated, which somehow made it worse. Emily looked up, and for a brief second the world seemed to pause. He was standing directly in front of the desk, tall, wearing an expensive coat that didn't advertise its price, but clearly cost more than her monthly rent. Dark hair, slightly tousled, as if he didn't bother paying attention to it. A face that was far too composed, far too controlled. Men like him always knew what they wanted, and rarely heard the word no. "I have an appointment," he said evenly. "Dr. Harris, 9 o'clock. She nodded and turned to her computer, typing in the details. Last name, first name. And that was when she felt it. Not pain, but something deeper, as if the air in her lungs had suddenly grown heavier. "Please wait a moment," she said, still not looking at him. "I already am," he replied calmly. There was something in his tone that made her fingers pause above the keyboard. She glanced at the screen, then back at him. Their eyes met. Nothing romantic, nothing beautiful, just a sharp, almost physical collision of two different worlds. "You'll need to wait," Emily said, her voice firmer now. "The doctor is running late." "How long?" "I can't say." He studied her, too closely, the way people don't look at receptionists but at problems they intend to solve. "I was told this meeting was important and that someone would be expecting me." "We don't expect anyone," she replied, quietly but clearly. "We see patients." A pause settled between them. She saw something shift in his expression. Not anger, interest, sharp, dangerous. "Then," he said slowly, "let's start with your name." Emily felt irritation rise inside her. "It's on the badge. I prefer when people introduce themselves." Emily straightened. "Emily." "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said, leaning slightly closer. "My name is Lucas." The name landed unexpectedly. Too familiar. Too poorly timed. She didn't understand why her heart skipped for just a moment. "All right, Lucas," she said evenly. "Please take a seat. Someone will call you." He didn't move. "Are you always this cold?" he asked quietly. "Only with people who ask unnecessary questions." And that was when he smiled. Not openly, not kindly. The kind of smile worn by people who have just decided this story isn't over yet. "Then I suppose we'll need to get to know each other better," he said. Emily was about to respond when a voice echoed from down the corridor. "Mr. Hale?" Lucas finally stepped back. "See you soon, Emily," he said calmly. "I'm sure we will." She watched him walk away, unsure why a sense of unease settled in her chest. She didn't yet understand that this meeting wasn't an accident.
that this man was tied to her past far more deeply than she could imagine, and that from this morning on, her life would begin to crack, slowly but irreversibly.
The voice came too close. Low, calm, confident, not irritated, and somehow that made it worse. Emily lifted her eyes. For a single second, the world seemed to pause. He was standing right in front of the desk, tall, wearing an expensive coat that didn't need to announce its price, it simply carried it. Dark hair, slightly disordered, as if he didn't bother to control details. His face was too composed, too sure of itself. Men like that always knew what they wanted, and rarely heard the word no. "I have an appointment," he said evenly. "Dr. Harris, 9 o'clock." Emily nodded and turned to the computer, typing in the details. Last name, first name, and then she felt it. Not pain, no, something deeper, as if the air in her lungs suddenly became heavier. "Please wait a moment," she said, still not looking at him. "I already am," he replied calmly. There was something in that tone that made her fingers pause above the keyboard. She looked at the screen, then back at him. Their eyes met. Nothing romantic, nothing soft, just the sharp, almost physical collision of two very different worlds. "You'll have to wait," Emily said, her voice changing, sharper, firmer. "The doctor is running late." "How long?" "I can't say." He studied her carefully, too carefully, the way people don't look at receptionists, but at problems that need to be solved. "I was told this meeting was important, and that I would be expected." "We don't expect anyone," she answered quietly, but clearly. "We receive patients." A pause settled between them. Emily saw something shift in his gaze. Not anger, interest, sharp and dangerous. "Then," he said slowly, "let's start with your name." Irritation rose in her chest. "It's on the badge." "I prefer when people introduce themselves." She straightened. "Emily." "Nice to meet you, Emily," he said, leaning just a little closer. "My name is Lucas." The name hit her unexpectedly. Too familiar. Too poorly timed. She didn't understand why her heart skipped for a fraction of a second. "All right, Lucas," she said evenly. "Please take a seat. You'll be called." He didn't move. "Are you always this cold?" he asked softly. "Only with people who ask unnecessary questions." And then he smiled. Not openly, not kindly, the kind of smile people wear when they've just decided this story isn't over yet. "Then I suppose," he said, "we'll have to get to know each other better." Emily opened her mouth to respond when a voice echoed from down the corridor. "Mr. Hale?" Lucas finally stepped back. "Until next time, Emily," he said calmly. "I'm sure there will be one." She watched him walk away, unsure why a quiet sense of unease settled in her chest. She didn't understand yet that this meeting was no coincidence, that this man was connected to her past far more deeply than she could imagine, and that from this morning on, her life would begin to fracture, slowly but irreversibly. She watched him walk away and couldn't explain the unease tightening in her chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't attraction. It was something far more unsettling, the sense that this encounter had already been written long before today. She turned back to her screen, forced her fingers to move, to type, to do her job. Around her, the clinic breathed in its usual rhythm. Footsteps, distant voices, the low hum of morning routines. But inside her, something had shifted. She didn't yet understand that this meeting was not an accident, that this man was connected to her past far more deeply than she could imagine, and that from this morning on,
her carefully controlled life would begin to crack, slowly, quietly, and beyond repair. He was not a patient. Emily didn't understand right away what had changed. At first glance, everything looked the same. The line at the reception desk stretched toward the entrance, the phone kept ringing, the printer stubbornly swallowed papers one after another. Mornings at North Shore Medical Center were always like this, loud, restless, filled with foreign lives and foreign fears. But something had shifted anyway. Conversations grew quieter. Footsteps slowed, became cautious. Someone near the desk suddenly stopped mid-sentence, as if catching themselves. Emily felt it with her back, a strange pressure, the unmistakable sense that something large and demanding had appeared behind her. She lifted her head. The glass doors of the clinic slid open, and he walked in. Lucas Hale. He didn't search the reception desk with his eyes. He already knew where it was. He didn't look around, as if this place wasn't new to him at all. His stride was calm, confident, almost unhurried, but there was authority in it, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself. He wore a dark coat, perfectly tailored at the shoulders, and a suit chosen with quiet precision. Nothing flashy, nothing excessive. A man accustomed to decisions being made around him and for him. Beside him walked the clinic's chief administrator, his smile tense, carefully controlled. Not the smile reserved for patients, but the kind meant for someone whose approval mattered too much. A step behind followed two more figures from management, speaking in low voices, leaning toward Lucas, unwilling to fall behind. Something unpleasant tightened inside Emily's chest. He wasn't here by accident, and he wasn't here as a patient. Their eyes met. This time, consciously. There was no surprise in his gaze, no irritation, only calm recognition. As if he were checking something off in his mind. Yes, she was here. Everything matched his memory. Emily held his gaze deliberately. She wasn't going to look away first. Emily felt the shift before she fully understood it. The noise in the lobby didn't disappear. Phones still rang, printers still jammed, patients still waited. But the rhythm changed. Conversations softened. Movements became cautious, as if the building itself had sensed a new presence and adjusted its breath. She looked up. Lucas Hale was no longer just passing through. He stopped several steps from the reception desk, surveying the space with calm precision. Not like a visitor, like someone assessing a system, noting weaknesses, pressure points, leverage. "You're running at full capacity," he said evenly. It wasn't a question. "We usually are in the mornings," Emily replied, her voice controlled, professional, neutral. He turned fully toward her. "You're still here. That means the system is holding." The words tightened something beneath her ribs. "I'm doing my job, exactly what I was hired to do." His gaze lingered longer than it should have, not on her uniform, not on her badge, but on her face, studying, measuring. "People like you," he said quietly, "are what keeps systems alive." She didn't look away. "Until they're the first to break," he added. Her fingers curled beneath the counter. "If you have questions," Emily said, her tone colder now, "you should direct them to management." The corner of his mouth shifted, barely. "Oh, we will," Lucas replied calmly, "in detail." He paused, held her gaze. "But you, Emily, are the face of this place, the first point of contact." The words were polite, controlled, but they carried weight, like a warning disguised as a fact. "And that means," he finished, "we'll be crossing paths." For a brief moment, the space between them felt too narrow. Then Lucas turned and walked down the corridor. People moved aside instinctively. Conversations resumed, quieter now, careful. Emily watched him disappear, a tight knot forming in her chest. She didn't know why he was here. She didn't know what he planned to change. But she knew one thing with certainty. Lucas Hale was not a man who entered your world without consequences.
Lucas turned and walked deeper into the corridor. People moved aside without realizing why. Conversations resumed, but quieter now, cautious, restrained, as if the building itself had sensed a shift in balance. Emily watched him go and felt a strange mix of anger and unease tightening in her chest. She didn't know why he had returned. She didn't know what exactly he intended to change, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Lucas Hale was not the kind of man who entered your life and left without consequences. And if he had stepped into her workplace again, it meant the boundaries she had spent years building were no longer untouchable. Emily understood what was happening before anyone explained it to her. It started with small things. A pause that lingered too long when she approached a desk. A sudden silence when she entered a room. Glances exchanged behind her back, quick, careful, assessing. Lucas Hale had not disappeared after his visit. He had stayed. Not physically beside her, but above her. She felt it in the way the head nurse straightened her posture when his name was mentioned, in the way supervisors lowered their voices when discussing schedules, in the way her name began to surface in conversations that had never included her before. Emily was no longer invisible, and that terrified her. The first remark came during the morning briefing. They stood in a semicircle near the nurses' station, tired faces, coffee cups clutched like lifelines. The supervisor flipped through a clipboard, eyes scanning names. "Emily Carter," she said, then paused. The pause was deliberate. "Yes," Emily answered calmly. "Make sure you double-check patient files today. We can't afford inconsistencies." The word landed heavier than it should have. Emily nodded. Of course. Someone behind her shifted uncomfortably. She felt it, the unspoken thought. Why her? An hour later, it happened again. A nurse stopped her at the hallway intersection. "Emily," she said politely, too politely, "Mr. Hale asked that all front desk interactions be especially professional today." Emily froze for half a second. "He didn't say that to me," Emily replied evenly. The nurse hesitated. "He said it to administration." Of course he did. Lucas never raised his voice, never made a scene, never gave her anything she could confront directly. He applied pressure quietly, the way powerful men always did. By noon, the weight had settled fully. Every movement felt observed. Every word felt measured. Emily adjusted her badge for the third time that hour, fingers tense. She caught her reflection in the glass wall, navy uniform, neutral expression, shoulders held straight by sheer force of will. She looked composed. She felt trapped. And then she heard his voice. Not loud, not sharp, calm, controlled. "Miss Carter." Her spine stiffened before she turned. Lucas stood several steps away, hands relaxed at his sides, posture impeccable. People passed between them, but the space felt sealed, like the rest of the clinic had faded out. "Yes, Mr. Hale?" she asked professionally. His gaze moved slowly over her, not her body, not her uniform, but her posture, her stillness, the tension she worked so hard to hide. "You seem under pressure today." It was not concern, it was observation. "I'm working," Emily replied. A faint smile touched his lips. "Good," he said quietly. "Pressure reveals discipline." Her jaw tightened. "And what does it reveal to you?" she asked.
Lucas leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough that only she could hear. "Whether someone bends or breaks." Emily met his eyes. She did not look away. "Then you'll be disappointed," she said calmly. "I don't do either." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Not anger, interest, and that, more than anything, made his stomach twist.
The corridor felt narrower than it should have. Too bright, too clean. Every sound echoed. Footsteps, distant voices, the soft hum of fluorescent lights. Emily walked ahead, her spine straight, her expression carefully neutral. She knew this walk. She had done it 1,000 times, but never like this. Lucas followed a few steps behind, not close enough to touch, not far enough to ignore. "You missed a protocol update this morning," he said calmly, breaking the silence. His voice didn't rise, it didn't accuse, it stated. Emily stopped. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "I followed the instructions given to me by my supervisor," she replied. "If something changed, it wasn't communicated." He looked at her the way one looks at numbers that don't add up. "In an institution like this," Lucas said, "wasn't communicated is not an excuse. It's a vulnerability." Her jaw tightened. "Then perhaps the system should look at how information flows," she said evenly, "instead of blaming the people at the bottom of it." For a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Not anger, not amusement, interest. "Careful, Emily," he said quietly. "You're speaking to someone who decides how that system will look tomorrow." The words landed exactly where he intended. She felt it, the imbalance, the invisible weight of power pressing down. This wasn't a personal argument. It was a reminder of who he was here, of who she wasn't. "Understood," she said after a pause. One word: controlled, professional. Lucas watched her for a second longer than necessary. "Good," he said finally, "because I expect excellence, especially from people who pretend this doesn't affect them." He stepped past her, his shoulder brushing the air near her arm, not touching, but close enough to feel deliberate. Emily remained standing in the corridor, her hands clenched at her sides. She hated that her pulse had quickened, hated that his presence lingered even after he walked away, hated most of all that part of her knew this wasn't just humiliation, it was a test. And somehow, she had the sense that he wasn't finished applying pressure. By the end of the shift, Emily's hands were shaking. Not from physical exhaustion, she was used to that, but from the slow, methodical pressure that had been applied to her all day. Lucas Hale never raised his voice, never insulted her directly, never crossed a line that could be written down or reported, and yet every word had landed exactly where it was meant to. A comment about efficiency spoken loudly enough for others to hear, a correction made in front of colleagues, a pause just a second too long when she answered a question, followed by his calm, measuring look, as if he were testing how much she could endure, as if he wanted to see where she would break. When she finally left the building, the late afternoon air felt sharp and unreal. The city moved around her as usual, cars, voices, life, but she felt strangely detached from it, like she was walking through glass. She hated him. Not the way people hate loud bullies or cruel men. She hated him because he never looked cruel while doing it, because he made her doubt herself without ever touching her, and worst of all, because beneath the anger, beneath the humiliation, there was something else. Awareness. She was aware of him in every room, aware of his presence, his silence, his attention, heavy and deliberate, and that terrified her more than his power ever could. Because power could be resisted, but being seen like this, stripped of defenses, measured, remembered, felt dangerously close to something else,
something she refused to name. That night, lying awake in the dark, Emily told herself one thing over and over. She would not let Lucas Hale break her. She would survive this, even if surviving meant hardening in ways she never wanted to. She didn't know yet that this was exactly what he was waiting for.
Emily understood something was wrong before she heard her name. The tone changed first. Voices lowered. The corridor outside the administrative wing grew tense, as if the walls themselves were listening. M-O-C-T. The doctor's voice was sharp, public, deliberate. Emily turned slowly. Dr. Whitman stood near the nurse's station, tablet in hand, irritation written openly on his face. He didn't bother lowering his voice. "Do you have any idea how much time you waste every morning with your procedures?" he continued. "This is a medical center, not a customer service desk at an airport." People nearby pretended not to listen. No one ever intervened. Emily straightened her back. "I follow the protocol approved by administration," she said evenly. "Patient verification is mandatory." Whitman scoffed. "Protocols are flexible. Efficiency is not. Maybe if you understood how real medicine works." "She understands exactly how this system works." The voice came from behind. Calm, low, unmistakable. Lucas Hale stepped into the corridor. He hadn't raised his voice. He didn't need to. The effect was immediate. Whitman froze, just for a second, but Emily saw it. The hesitation, the recalculation. "Mr. Hale, I didn't realize," Whitman began, "that you were speaking to one of my employees like this." Lucas finished for him. Silence dropped hard between them. Emily turned toward Lucas, stunned. My employee. "North Shore loses millions every year due to administrative errors," Lucas continued calmly. "And yet you're upset because someone is doing her job correctly?" Whitman's jaw tightened. "I was simply pointing out—" "You were asserting authority in public," Lucas said. "Inefficient, unprofessional, and unnecessary." He looked at Emily then. Not cold, not sharp. Measured. "Miss Carter, thank you for following protocol. Please continue your work." Emily didn't move right away. She felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief, not gratitude. Disorientation. Lucas turned back to Whitman. "If you have operational concerns, you bring them to management, not to the front desk. Not like this." Whitman nodded stiffly. "Of course, I didn't mean, I know what you meant." Lucas stepped past him, already done. Emily watched him walk away, and for the first time since meeting him, she didn't know which version of Lucas Hale was real. The man who humiliated her, or the man who had just stepped in front of her without hesitation. And that uncertainty frightened her far more than his cruelty ever had. The doctor's voice was sharp. Too sharp. "You should have handled this already," he said, not lowering his tone. "Administrative delays cost us time, and time costs lives." Emily felt the familiar pressure settle between her shoulder blades. That instinctive need to apologize, even when she wasn't at fault. "I followed the protocol," she said calmly. "The documents were incomplete. I flagged it immediately." "And yet here we are," the doctor snapped, "still waiting." She was about to respond when Lucas spoke. "That's enough." The word cut through the air cleanly. Not loud, not aggressive. Final. The doctor turned toward him, clearly irritated. "This is an internal matter, Mr. Hale." Lucas stepped closer. Not into the doctor's space, but close enough to make one thing clear. This conversation now included him. "You're right," Lucas said evenly. "It is internal, which means you don't use public pressure to compensate for your own oversight." A pause. The corridor felt suddenly too quiet. If there's a failure in process, Lucas continued, you address it at the source, not by humiliating the person who caught it. The doctor's jaw tightened. She's an administrator, he said. She's supposed to... She did exactly what she was supposed to do, Lucas said. Still calm, still controlled, but now unmistakably firm. Emily stood very still. No one had ever said that for her. Not like this. Not here. Not out loud. Lucas turned slightly toward her. You flagged the issue. You documented it. You followed procedure. Then back to the doctor. If you have a problem, he said, you bring it to management. Or to me. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a line being drawn. Emily felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. Not relief. Something more dangerous.
Emily felt it only after he walked away. The shift in the air, the silence that followed him. The corridor slowly returned to its normal rhythm, footsteps, voices, the distant sound of carts, but something had already changed. Not outside, inside her. She stood still for a moment longer than necessary, pretending to review documents on the tablet in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, from the realization. He had intervened, publicly, without hesitation. Not to humiliate her, not to control her, to stop someone else. She hated how confusing that was. Lucas Hale was still the same man, cold, calculated, dangerous in his own quiet way. He hadn't softened, he hadn't apologized, he hadn't explained anything. And yet, he had drawn a line. Emily lifted her eyes and looked down the corridor where he had disappeared. She told herself it meant nothing, that this was strategy, image management, power protecting its own interests, that men like him didn't change. But somewhere, deep beneath the armor she had built around herself, a crack had formed. And cracks were dangerous, because once something got inside, it was never easy to force it back out. Emily felt it only after he walked away. The shift in the air, the silence that followed him. The corridor slowly returned to its normal rhythm, footsteps, voices, the distant sound of carts, but something had already changed. Not outside, inside her. She stood still for a moment longer than necessary, pretending to review documents on the tablet in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, from the realization. He had intervened, publicly, without hesitation. Not to humiliate her, not to control her, to stop someone else. She hated how confusing that was. Lucas Hale was still the same man, cold, calculated, dangerous in his own quiet way. He hadn't softened, he hadn't apologized, he hadn't explained anything. And yet, he had drawn a line. Emily lifted her eyes and looked down the corridor where he had disappeared. She told herself it meant nothing, that this was strategy, image management, power protecting its own interests, that men like him didn't change. But somewhere, deep beneath the armor she had built around herself, a crack had formed. And cracks were dangerous, because once something got inside, it was never easy to force it back out. Emily felt it only after he walked away. The shift in the air, the silence that followed him. The corridor slowly returned to its normal rhythm, footsteps, voices, the distant sound of carts, but something had already changed. Not outside, inside her. She stood still for a moment longer than necessary, pretending to review documents on the tablet in her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, from the realization. He had intervened, publicly, without hesitation. Not to humiliate her, not to control her, to stop someone else. She hated how confusing that was. Lucas Hale was still the same man, cold, calculated, dangerous in his own quiet way. He hadn't softened, he hadn't apologized, he hadn't explained anything. And yet, he had drawn a line. Emily lifted her eyes and looked down the corridor where he had disappeared. She told herself it meant nothing, that this was strategy, image management, power protecting its own interests, that men like him didn't change. But somewhere, deep beneath the armor she had built around herself, a crack had formed. And cracks were dangerous, because once something got inside, it was never easy to force it back out.
Emily did not learn the truth all at once. It did not arrive as a confession or a dramatic revelation. It slipped through cracks, through pauses, through things Lucas didn't say when he should have. She began to notice it in the way he watched certain corridors longer than others, in how his jaw tightened when specific names appeared on schedules or reports, in the moments when his control faltered just for a second before snapping back into place. This clinic was not just a project to him. It was not an investment. It was something unfinished, something unresolved. "You don't belong here," Emily said quietly one evening, the words leaving her before she could stop them. Lucas turned to her slowly. "That's not true," he replied. "I belong here more than anyone." There was no arrogance in his voice this time, only certainty and something darker beneath it. She looked at him then, really looked, and understood what had been hiding behind his composure. This place had taken something from him, and he had come back not to heal it, but to control it. For the first time since they met, Emily realized something far more dangerous than his power. Lucas Hale was afraid. And if he was capable of fear, then he was capable of losing everything. Emily didn't answer right away. For the first time since she had met him, silence stretched between them not as a weapon, but as a weight. Lucas stood close, not invading her space now, waiting. "I wasn't always like this," he said finally, his voice lower, quieter than before. "People see the result, they never ask what it cost." Emily lifted her eyes. "And what did it cost you?" she asked. Something flickered across his face, not anger, not control. Fatigue. "I learned early that if you don't take control, someone else will take it from you," he said. "And once you let go, you don't get to choose how much they take." She understood suddenly that this wasn't an explanation meant to soften him. It was a confession. "You use pressure like armor," Emily said quietly, "because without it, you don't know how to stand." Lucas exhaled slowly. "And you," he replied, "carry strength so quietly that people mistake it for weakness." The words landed deeper than she expected. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The clinic around them continued to exist, footsteps, distant voices, the muted rhythm of another working day, but it all felt far away. "You should stay away from me," Lucas said at last. "People who get close don't come out unchanged." Emily met his gaze, steady now. "I've already changed," she answered, "and you noticed." That was when he realized it. He wasn't afraid of losing control. He was afraid of losing her. And that fear, unfamiliar, unwanted, settled in his chest like a crack in something he had believed unbreakable.
Emily was the first to leave. She didn't slam the door, didn't throw words after herself. She simply turned and stepped into a space where he no longer belonged. Lucas remained standing in the hospital corridor,
for the first time in a long while not knowing what to do next. He was used to controlling situations, people, numbers, decisions, used to the world adjusting itself to his stride, but not now. He watched her walk away, her back straight, her steps steady, not a trace of weakness, and that angered him more than if she had screamed. "Emily," he called out. She stopped, but she didn't turn around. "Don't," she said calmly. "Not now." That "not now" sounded like never. Lucas clenched his jaw. Inside him, irritation rose, familiar, sharp, convenient. The same irritation he usually used to seal off any vulnerability. "You're leaving because it's easier?" he asked harshly. "Because you don't want to deal with this?" She turned slowly. There was no fear in her eyes, only exhaustion. "I'm leaving because you turn everything into a battlefield," she replied, "even those who didn't come with weapons." He took a step toward her. "You knew who I was," he said. "You knew what you were getting into." "No, Lucas," she interrupted. "I knew who you seemed to be, and today I saw who you choose to be." The words struck more precisely than any accusation. "I was protecting you," he said dully. "I was on your side." "No," Emily shook her head. "You were protecting your influence, your control. I was just along the way." Silence settled between them. Lucas understood. If he took another step now, she would leave for good. If he stepped back, he would lose her just the same. "I don't know how to be any different," he said at last. It was almost a confession, almost a plea. Emily looked at him for a long time, too long. "Then learn, but not at my expense." She turned and walked away, this time without stopping.
Inside him, something broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. He didn't lose a woman. He lost the point everything had been built around. Lucas stood alone in the clinic corridor while life moved on around him as if nothing had happened. Patients walking past, doctors discussing schedules, elevator signals echoing through the halls. The system worked. The world functioned. Only his didn't. For the first time, he understood what had really failed. Not because of pressure, not because of resistance, not because someone challenged him, but because the system he had spent his life perfecting had never left room for choice. And now, standing there without control, without certainty, without her, he realized the truth he had avoided for years. Power could force obedience. Money could bend outcomes. Fear could silence people. But none of it could make someone stay. And for the first time in his life, Lucas Hale had nothing left to command. He stopped waiting. It was the strangest and the hardest decision of his life, to stop waiting for her to come back, to stop checking the corridors, to stop catching every sound of footsteps, hoping to recognize their rhythm. Lucas accepted a simple, painful truth. If Emily left forever, he had no right to hold on to her, even in his thoughts. The clinic lived its usual life: meetings, documents, decisions, signatures. But something in it had changed, subtly, almost imperceptibly to those who only looked at the surface. He canceled several orders, reviewed regulations, changed his tone. Doctors were surprised. Administrators exchanged glances. Lucas Hale no longer entered rooms like an owner to whom everyone owed something. He listened. He stopped. He asked. And each time he made a decision, he asked himself one question: am I doing this because I can, or because it's right? The answer was no longer always obvious. Emily didn't know about this right away. She simply returned to work a few days later, without loud words, without scenes, without expectations.
the same uniform, the same desk, the same clinic. But inside, she was different. She no longer felt small. She didn't justify herself. She didn't shrink when someone spoke too sharply. She didn't return to him. She returned to herself. And only after that, to the possibility of a conversation.
Emily did not know about it right away. She simply returned to work a few days later, without loud words, without scenes, without expectations. The same uniform, the same desk, the same clinic. But inside, she was different. She no longer felt small. She did not justify herself. She did not shrink when someone spoke too sharply. She did not return to him. She returned to herself. And only after that, to the possibility of a conversation. Their meeting did not happen immediately. Not in a corridor, not in front of others. It was late in the evening, when the clinic had almost emptied and the light in the lobby became softer, quieter, almost domestic. Emily was gathering documents at the front desk when she felt his presence, not as pressure, but as calm proximity. She raised her eyes. Lucas stood at a distance. He did not come closer. He did not cross boundaries. "I didn't want to disturb you," he said quietly. "If you're not ready to talk, I'll understand." It was unexpected. She nodded. "I'm ready," she answered, "just not the way it was before." He smiled slightly, not his former smile, confident and dangerous, but another one, a little tired, honest. "Any way works for me," he said, "as long as you don't feel cornered." They fell silent. There was distance between them, physical and emotional, and neither of them hurried to close it. This silence did not press. It was full. "I'm not apologizing," Lucas finally said, "not because I don't consider myself guilty, but because I understand that words solve nothing here." She looked at him attentively, calmly. "Then what do you want?" she asked. "For you to see," he answered, "not my intentions, but my actions." He did not step forward, did not reach out his hand, did not try to touch her. And that was the strongest gesture of all. Emily felt something inside her slowly, cautiously begin to thaw. Not trust, not yet, but possibility. "I don't promise anything," she said quietly. "I don't know where this will lead." "Neither do I," he replied, "and for the first time, it doesn't scare me." She stepped closer, not too close, just enough to see his eyes without tension. "Then let's start with something simple. No games, no pressure, no control." He nodded. "On equal terms." She smiled, sincerely for the first time in a long while. And in that brief moment, there was more closeness than in all of their previous collisions. When he carefully touched her hand, not holding her, not pulling her closer, she did not pull away. And that was enough. Not a promise, not a finale, but a beginning. Because real love does not appear where someone wins. It is born where both choose. And this time, the choice was conscious.